Imagine you wake up and your life has completely changed. My name is Thomas. I am 48, an accountant, and my life is built on neat rows of data. My wife, Sarah, was upstairs, the sounds of her getting ready for bed a familiar comfort. Our son, Mark, was away at college, a new quiet in our suburban house that we were still getting used to. We had an anniversary trip to Italy planned in just 2 weeks. We hadn't been to Italy since our honeymoon years ago. I thought everything was fine between us, settled into the comfortable worn-in rhythm of a long marriage. The day had been normal, filled with client calls and spreadsheets, a mundane existence that I found reassuringly solid. Dinner was quiet, not in a bad way, but in the peaceful way of two people who know each other so well that words aren't always necessary. I was wiping down the kitchen counter, a small domestic task that usually soothed me. That's when I saw it. Sarah had left her phone unlocked and face up on the marble. A new text message notification glowing on the screen. It was from a contact saved as John P. The message simply read, "I miss our little secret." The words were a clean surgical cut. The name wasn't a friend or a coworker I knew. It was just a name and three simple, terrible words. It was a sentence that didn't fit, that belonged in some other story, a story of betrayal and deceit. The simple message felt like a bomb going off in our quiet, boring life. My mind started to race, trying to find a benign explanation, but there was nothing, just the glowing screen and those awful words, a cold, undeniable fact laid bare on the counter. The wet rag in my hand felt impossibly heavy. The mundane silence of our house was suddenly filled with a cold, new fear. This was the moment everything changed, even though nothing had actually happened yet. I didn't say anything to Sarah that night. I just went upstairs and got into bed, the cold message a live wire in my mind. I tried to act normal, to go through the motions of our nightly routine, but the quiet between us felt different now. We had always been people who didn't need to fill every silence with talk. I had always thought that was a sign of our comfort with each other. Now it felt like a vast, empty space where things could hide. I kept replaying the image of the phone screen in my head. I miss our little secret. It was so simple, so plain, so damn real. I couldn't stop thinking about the name John P., a name that meant absolutely nothing to me. I thought back over the past few months, looking for clues I must have missed. Sarah had been working late more often. She said it was a big project. She started going to the gym more, and she bought some new clothes, things that weren't her usual style. I had just assumed she was trying to get in shape for our trip, or maybe just feeling good about herself. It was all so easy to explain away at the time. I was an accountant, someone who dealt in facts and clear data, but I was suddenly faced with a problem that had no numbers. It was a problem of feelings and secrets. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach every time she smiled, every time she said something nice to me. I started to wonder if it was all a performance, a way to keep up the pretense of our perfect life. We talked about Italy the next day at breakfast. She was excited, but I felt like I was talking to a stranger. I kept waiting for her to mention something, to explain it away, to offer some kind of reason, but she never did. She was just Sarah, but a version of Sarah that I suddenly didn't know at all. The next few days were a blur of nervous energy and fake smiles. I felt like I was an actor in a play I didn't understand. I found myself watching Sarah all the time, looking for any sign of a lie, any small detail that would confirm my fear. I noticed she took her phone everywhere with her, even to the bathroom, something she had never done before. I saw her typing with a strange intensity, and then quickly putting the phone away when I entered the room. My mind started playing tricks on me, making me hear things that weren't there and see things that weren't real. I started to doubt myself, to question my own memory of our life together. Maybe I was making this all up. Maybe I was going crazy. I tried to push the thoughts away, to focus on my work, but the numbers on my spreadsheets blurred into her face and the text message. The knot in my stomach was a constant companion now, a heavy stone that sat just below my ribs. I found myself becoming distant and quiet, and Sarah noticed. She asked me if everything was okay, but her voice felt hollow, like she was just going through the motions. I told her I was just stressed with work. It was the only lie I could come up with. The lie felt like a new crack in the foundation of our house. It was a secret I was now keeping from her, and it made me feel sick. I felt like I was starting to lose control of my own life, of my own mind. The calm, predictable world I had built was slipping through my fingers, and I was powerless to stop it. I was losing my grip on reality and starting to believe that the solid ground beneath me was a fake. The The silence in our house became a living thing, a weight that pressed down on me every time I walked into a room. My mind was a tangled mess of what ifs and possibilities. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, that there was a perfectly logical explanation. Maybe John P. was a client or a friend I didn't know about, or maybe the message was a mistake, a stray text meant for someone else. I desperately wanted to believe it, but a cold, hard logic that I used in my accounting work told me otherwise. It didn't add up. The gym visits and the new clothes and the late nights suddenly made sense in a terrifying new way. I started looking at old photos of us, trying to find the point where things started to go wrong. I was searching for an answer I knew I wouldn't find, an easy solution to a complex problem. I felt a misplaced guilt, like maybe I was the reason for this, that I had somehow failed her. I considered confronting her, but the thought of her lying to my face was unbearable. I couldn't stand the idea of her looking me in the eyes and telling me that everything was fine. I started to resent her for putting me in this position, for making me feel like a fool. I found myself snapping at her over small things. She would just look at me with a quiet indifference, like I was a problem she was used to. It made me feel even more alone. I was in a spiral of suspicion and self-doubt. I felt like I was losing my mind, caught between a truth I couldn't prove and a lie I couldn't live with. The next few days were a kind of cruel psychological torture. I was constantly on high alert, my senses heightened to every small detail. I started noticing things I had ignored before. Sarah had a new, expensive watch that I had never seen, and she wouldn't talk about where it came from. She started wearing a different perfume, something light and floral that wasn't her usual scent. My mind started putting the pieces together, and it was a puzzle I didn't want to solve. I found a receipt in her coat pocket for a ridiculously expensive dinner for two at a downtown restaurant we had never been to. The date was 2 weeks ago, on a night she said she was working late. I didn't confront her, I just put the receipt back, my hands trembling. The proof was right there in front of me, but I still couldn't bring myself to say the words out loud. It felt like if I said them, it would make it real, and I wasn't ready for that. My heart was pounding, a hollow drumbeat in my ears. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into a dark chasm. I knew the truth was down there, waiting for me, but I was too afraid to jump. My life had become a series of small, unsettling discoveries. Every new piece of evidence was another nail in the coffin of our marriage. I felt a growing sense of dread, a cold fear that was now a part of my daily routine. I was a professional at finding the truth in numbers, but I was paralyzed by a truth I didn't want to see. The stakes were rising, and I was still standing still. I couldn't move, and I couldn't breathe. I had spent enough time in this miserable, self-created purgatory. My mind, which was trained to see patterns and find the core of a problem, finally hit its breaking point. I knew I couldn't live with this uncertainty anymore. The constant suspicion was eating me alive, turning me into a person I didn't recognize. The final push came that Thursday. Sarah told me she was going out for a late dinner with a friend, an old college friend I had never met. I looked at her, and the lie was so obvious, a thin, transparent veil over her eyes. It was the night of the supposed John P. meeting. I felt a cold surge of resolve. I had to know, once and for all. So I said I had to go back to the office for some late-night work. A lie for a lie. I waited until her car pulled away, and then I got in my own car. I followed her, keeping a safe distance, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. I watched her drive to a part of town I didn't recognize, to a trendy restaurant with dim lighting and loud music. I parked down the street and watched. I saw her get out of her car and walk inside, her shoulders back and her step confident. A few minutes later, a man came out to meet her. He was tall, with dark hair, and he smiled as he took her hand. It was John P. I was sure of it. I watched them sit at a table by the window, their heads close together. I didn't need to see or hear anything else. The sight of them together was all the proof I needed. I drove home, the world a blurry wash of lights and colors, a sickening feeling in my stomach. I was right, but being right had never felt so much like a loss. I went home and waited for her in the dark, the house feeling like a cold, unfamiliar space. I sat in the living room, the streetlights outside casting long, distorted shadows on the walls, and I felt a chilling sense of emptiness settle in. I had a plan, a simple one born from a professional need for clarity. I wasn't going to yell or scream or throw things. I wasn't going to give her the drama she might have expected. I was going to be calm and collected, an accountant performing the final audit on our marriage. When she finally came home, a little after midnight, she was humming to herself, a cheerful tune that felt like a knife twisting in my gut. She walked into the living room and stopped short when she saw me sitting there in the dark. The humming stopped abruptly, and a flash of fear, raw and unguarded, crossed her face before she could hide it. "Thomas, you scared me," she said, her voice a little too bright, a little too false. I just looked at her, the silence stretching between us like a physical chasm. "I know," I said, the words barely a whisper. The pretense dropped from her face, replaced by a sudden fierce anger. She didn't ask what I knew. She went straight to the attack, her voice rising with a defensive edge. She told me I had no right to spy on her, that I was crazy, that I was a possessive husband who never trusted her. She didn't deny it, not once. She just got mad that I had found out. Her anger was all the confirmation I needed. The sight of her, so full of rage at being caught, was a brutal shock to the system. There were no apologies, no explanations, no tears, just a cold, hard fury at my discovery. Her world didn't fall apart. Mine did. She turned and went to bed, leaving me alone in the dark. The silence between us now was a chasm a mile wide, and I knew it could never be crossed again. The life we had built together, the one I thought was so solid and true, had just dissolved into nothing, leaving me with only the cold, hard, unassailable facts. The feeling was not one of release, but of profound loss, a heavy weight that settled on my chest and made it hard to breathe. I was right, but being right had never felt so much like a loss. I had traded my peaceful ignorance for a miserable, undeniable truth, and I was left with only that. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just sat there in the dark, the reality of my situation finally sinking in, a cold, hard stone in the pit of my stomach. The confrontation was over, and there was no sense of relief. There was just a vacuum where my life used to be. The next morning I woke up with a quiet, icy clarity. I wasn't going to look for peace or understanding anymore. I wasn't going to try to fix a marriage that had been a lie for God knows how long. The time for grieving was over. Now it was about taking back what was mine. I went to the office and worked through the morning, not a single number on a spreadsheet out of place. It was a cold, calculated calm that I had never felt before. I called a divorce lawyer on my lunch break and made an appointment for the next day. I didn't want to talk about feelings or emotions. I wanted to talk about assets and alimony and the house and the savings account. I wanted to talk about the things that could be quantified, the things that made sense. I had a lot of money in a joint account with Sarah, and I was going to move half of it. I wasn't going to wait for her to get her own lawyer and start to make demands. I was going to act first, to take control back. I was no longer a victim. I was a professional at finding the truth, and I was going to use those skills to dismantle the life she had so carelessly built on a foundation of lies. I wasn't a man looking for answers. I was a man looking for justice, and I was going to get it. I didn't care about the feelings anymore. I just cared about the numbers, and I knew exactly what I was doing. The icy calm I felt was a new and frightening kind of power. I was a professional at keeping things neat and orderly, and I was going to do the same with the complete wreckage of my life. I had a meeting with my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who listened to my story without judgment. I laid out everything, the phone message, the dinner receipt, the late nights, all of it. She nodded, taking notes, and told me I had a strong case. She said we could move forward with a filing for divorce and an injunction to freeze her access to our joint accounts. I told her to do it. The paperwork was just numbers to me, a series of boxes to check and forms to file. I didn't feel a thing. The money was just a tool to hurt her, a way to show her that her careless betrayal had a price. The next step was the house. I was going to stay in it, and she was going to leave. It was that simple. I went home that evening and watched her, a stranger in my own house. She was oblivious to what I had done, to the legal machinery I had set in motion. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife, but she seemed to think it was just a temporary silence between us. I was no longer looking for an emotional reaction. I was looking for an opportunity. I was going to wait for the right moment to strike, to show her that her little secret had a very public consequence. The game was no longer about feelings or hurt. It was about power, and I was going to win. The tension was at its peak. The final blow came on a Friday afternoon. I had just finished my last meeting of the week, and I was feeling a cold, righteous certainty. I had filed all the paperwork with my lawyer, and the injunction was now active. I went home and found Sarah on the couch, watching television, completely unaware of the bomb that was about to drop. I waited until the show she was watching ended, and then I spoke. My voice was calm, almost flat, like a machine. I told her that I had been to a lawyer. I told her that I knew about John P. and the affair. Her face went pale, a slow, dawning horror spreading across her features. She tried to deny it, to say I was crazy, but I just handed her a copy of the divorce papers. The sight of the legal documents, the cold, official language of a marriage ending, seemed to hit her harder than anything I could have said. She started to cry, but there were no real tears, just a series of dry sobs that felt hollow and empty. I watched her for a moment, and I didn't feel a thing. There was no victory, no sense of closure, just a deep, abiding emptiness. I watched her face, searching for a sign of genuine remorse or pain, but there was nothing. Just the shock of a woman who had been caught. I told her she had 24 hours to get her things and leave the house. I wasn't going to let her have the satisfaction of a fight. I wasn't going to give her a chance to explain. I was just going to end it. I drove her to the airport the next day. Her brother, the one who was also a lawyer, had bought her a ticket to Florida to stay with their aunt for a while. She was quiet in the car, a stranger in the passenger seat. We didn't talk about anything. We didn't talk about the divorce or the affair or the life we had spent 20 years building. There was nothing left to say. I dropped her off at the departure gate, and she just got out and walked away without looking back. There was no goodbye, just an exit. I watched her go, a small, solitary figure disappearing into the crowd, and I didn't feel anything. No relief, no sadness, no victory, just a deep, profound emptiness. The house felt even colder and bigger when I got home. My son, Mark, called me later that night. I told him his mother had left for Florida and that we were getting a divorce. He was shocked, but I didn't try to explain it. I just gave him the bare, brutal facts. There were no lessons learned here, no comfort found, just a lingering silence and the brutal truth that my life was now over, and a new one hadn't yet begun. There was just what was left, the silence, the distance, the emptiness. If you enjoyed this video, support it with a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Your reaction helps me create new stories.